Hi, I'm Daniel Torres. Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. Hi, Efrain. How are you doing?
Good, Daniel. Good to be with you. I'm enjoying a nice cup of espresso on this cold, rainy day here in Amsterdam.
I know. You mentioned that it's the windiest summer day in on record, which is pretty impressive.
It is indeed. It is not how I drew it up this morning when I thought about coming to work on a summer day for sure.
Yeah, well,
all which makes this cup of espresso all that much more delightful for sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned a cup of espresso because the guest that we have today comes from a company that produces espresso machines, and specifically the one that I have at home is a DeLonghi machine, believe it or not.
That's very ironic. Let's say.
There you go.
That's a great coincidence to have. So I'm sure that that our guest today is going to be able to enlighten us with regards to how use of those machines increased significantly during the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. So we're fortunate enough to have with us today the Chief Commercial Officer of DeLonghi, Mr. Paul Accornero. And with him, we want to understand his background, coming all the way from Australia, working in Asia and ending up in the executive team of an Italian company, how he started in FMCG and he transitioned to consumer electronics, and how he's seen this industry evolve in a number of ways in the last few years.
Paul Accornero. I'm Chief Commercial Officer for the DeLonghi Group, responsible for all commercial activities, subsidiaries worldwide for the company.
So, Paul, thanks for joining us today. And I'm curious to hear, I guess, one, just with regards to your current role, if you could tell us a little bit more about, in essence, the other places you worked and kind of, in essence, how you've managed that transition from a professional career standpoint in terms of moving into consumer electronics, particularly having come from FMCG in the past.
Sure. So I guess my background is probably my career can be split into three parts, always in sales and marketing roles, except for a brief stint after I graduated working for Ernst & Young. Then the rest of my career was spent in fast-moving consumer goods or in the electronics, consumer electronics space. The first 10 years I spent, as many people do in the early parts of their careers, I started in Ernst & Young. I did a few years there. Then I moved into different roles, different sales roles, starting as a sales rep, different marketing roles, state management roles in Australia. Then the next 11 years I spent in L'Oréal Group, which was an incredible experience, and I think gave me a great grounding both in marketing and in sales. First, L'Oréal is a great marketing academy. Working for a company like L'Oréal, you can't help but just learn about consumers, marketing, product development, identifying consumer segment opportunities. And I had a great experience there. The first 5 years I spent in Australia working for the company as general sales manager. And then I was fortunate enough to be relocated by L'Oréal to Asia and spent 6 years for L'Oréal in Hong Kong. Managing as the role I finished with there was General Manager of Commercial Policy and Strategy for the Asia Pacific region, where I was mostly working in the consumer products division and had some exposure to the luxury division. And somewhere in the middle there, I relocated for a couple of years to China, spending some time living in Shanghai, doing the chief commercial role for the luxury, for the consumer division in China as well, and then relocated back to Hong Kong. So I guess the experience of FMCG was a great a great learning ground. Also, that I then transported to consumer electronics when I had the opportunity to join DeLonghi. DeLonghi recruited me in Hong Kong, and when I joined this industry, which was new to me because I'd spent the previous, almost 15 years in FMCG type companies, I realized that the consumer electronics space, in some respects, compared to what I learnt in FMCG, was probably at an earlier stage of its development. Let me put it that way in terms of key account management. So I was able to bring my expertise in fast-moving consumer goods, the key account management experience that I had in L'Oreal. I also had exposure to the big international companies, customers like Walmart and Carrefour, and these companies where I managed those key accounts, as well as the different pharmacy chains, Watson's Group, and Dairy Farm in Asia. And I was able to transfer that experience, that key account management experience, that analytical skill set that I gained in FMCG, and transfer it to the consumer electronics industry.
Yeah, I guess that customer centricity must have been something that you saw a lot more in FMCG than in consumer electronics back in that day. No, I think that consumer electronics was much more manufacturing, industrial based versus consumer centric. No,
that's right, and absolutely, Daniel, and the consumer centricity, as you said, was very important, but also the understanding of the shopper. One thing is we market to consumers, but we sell to shoppers, right? And that's something that I really gained at L'Oreal, and understanding the importance of in-store execution, trade marketing, as well as product marketing, but trade marketing, and then working with retailers to build category management plans, etc. And you're right, 15 years ago, when I joined DeLonghi was a great company, but it was a European, Italian family company working in Europe, starting to globalize. And my job when I joined, I was responsible for what they called rest of the world for DeLonghi brand. So there was kind of Europe, somebody was looking after Europe, which was the biggest part of the business. And my job was to join the company and help to grow the international part of the business. In fact, the international business was the export department in those days. And but now, of course, we have a very strong global footprint. We have subsidiaries in many markets around the world, and it's a totally different place to the company that I joined. So my job was to bring those FMCG skills, to bring my experience working for a big corporate professional company like L'Oreal, and helping to globalize and internationalize, let me put it that way, the business for DeLonghi.
So I'm interested to hear, like you said, because you kind of in essence worked in both in FMCG and now in consumer electronics with DeLonghi for quite a while in both of those sectors. How has COVID, or what was the impact of COVID in consumer electronics, and how is that similar, different than what some of us may have seen as brand marketers who are in FMCG?
I guess we should be speaking about the impacts of COVID, no? Because I know it was a bit of a coaster for you guys.
For sure.
Sure. Well, yeah, putting aside for a second the negative parts, and there were plenty with COVID, but if we just look at the business impact, particularly in consumer electronics, it was a boom. It was a boom. We had 2 years of incredible growth. We added 50% to the business in the space of 2 years. So we went from being a 2 billion euro company to circa 3 billion euros in the space of 2 years during those two primary COVID years. At a time of total disruption, when it was very difficult to manage production facilities, there were logistics disruptions, finding electronics and components was at sometimes impossible, but we were still able to manage that level of growth. And the growth was definitely driven by consumer needs. So, of course, consumers, and there were different lockdown periods around the world and different stages in different countries, but mostly speaking, people were stuck at either at home or in their countries or in their regions. There were times they could not leave the house physically, so therefore they had to cook at home. They couldn't leave their homes to go to their local coffee shop, so they had to make their coffee at home. So this was the first demand driver, right? Just pure necessity. I have to cook now at home. I can't get to my coffee shop. I want to have my cappuccino or my espresso coffee that I'd normally have in the morning, and I'll have that at home now. So that was the first thing. There was also an element of cooking being a kind of form of entertainment, with everybody's kids also stuck at home. I think there was a great lack of things to do, and cooking, baking became a kind of way of keeping the family occupied. And we saw a boom in categories like kitchen machines, which was it's a very big category. It's an important category, but it had been in a kind of decline for many years. And we saw a boom in kitchen machines because people were just baking at home, right? Making cakes to either keep themselves happy, treat themselves, or to kind of entertain the kids. Baking was a kind of entertainment. So that was a big driver during the COVID years, was this idea of entertainment, cooking at home, having my coffee at home, and just the fact that people couldn't go out to eat, so they were stuck with food preparation in the home. Then, of course, there was the post-COVID period, and that sort of hit last year. And there was a kind of perfect storm at that moment. So you had first people able to leave, able to eat out, able to travel, and that's what they did, right? They were no longer stuck at home, and they went out and they spent their money on other things. So in restaurants, traveling and whatnot.
Yeah.
And that, of course, meant that there was a big decline in many of the consumer electronics categories last year. On top of that, there was the invasion of the Ukraine, and that, of course, had an impact on everything that we know: commodity prices, inflation, and as a result of that, people probably had less disposable income, but they tended to spend that disposable income on the things they couldn't spend it on in the previous few years. And that was something else that hit the industry. And also last year, I think generally retailers were overstocked. You had this sort of drop off in consumer demand hitting at the same time as at the end of the prior year. There were massive supply chain shortages. Most companies couldn't keep up with demand. Retailers were basically buying everything they could because they were very worried that they wouldn't have anything to sell in Christmas 2021. And as a result, they were placing big orders, which sort of all arrived at the same moment or soon, just as demand was dropping off. And as a result, there was huge overstocks in retail last year across the industry.
Yeah.
Hit all
and even
parts.
in other categories.
And in other categories as well. And it was a kind of perfect storm last year. So now this year, certainly probably Q1 last year was still good months in the post-COVID, but once the invasion of Ukraine happened, it seemed to be the moment that demand dropped off, particularly in Europe. Probably the US continued quite strongly. Asia was still quite strong, but definitely Europe was a big drop-off, as well as the fact that, many companies pulled out of Russia or slowed down their business in Russia at the time. And Russia is a big market, or was a big market for consumer electronics in the last couple of years.
Yeah. And how do you see this new market now for consumer electronics, like this new normal after this COVID roller coaster that you just described?
Well, I think there's starting to be a little bit of a normalization. So Q1 this year compared to Q1 last year was a difficult comparative. But if you look at Q2 onwards, I see really a lot of momentum, a lot of growth across our customers. The ones that were more reliant on e-commerce, probably a little bit tougher because e-commerce obviously had a boost during the COVID period. And now the split of business between e-commerce and non-e-commerce in the industry, in the small domestic appliances industry, is roughly slightly more than it was before COVID, but roughly in line with COVID again. So it seems that consumers are back in stores roughly in the same numbers and buying in the same as they were before COVID. So e-commerce players have suffered a lot, the pure players especially, but the brick and mortar stores are doing very well. And, I think I'll say thanks to COVID, I think the brick and mortar stores during the COVID period were able to reorganize their businesses, and many retailers around the world went from thinking of themselves as pure offline players, maybe with a very, very small e-commerce business that they were not really paying attention to. COVID forced all those retailers to suddenly think more seriously and upgrade their e-commerce platforms, businesses, business models, click and collect and everything else. And they started to do very well. And I think those retailers realized that their stores are an asset. E-commerce can be a good way of supporting their stores. They started to think as omni-channel players rather than uniquely only physical store retailers. And as a result, the businesses are doing much better because of that. Where the online pure players have probably struggled a little bit because they don't have the physical stores. And we know that consumers still like to shop in stores, right? So it's not that consumers only want to buy online. They want to have the choice of buying where they like. And that may be online, that might be offline, and it's sort of the lines are blurred between the two these days. But physical stores are still important, and I think a lot of retailers reorganize their businesses to be much more omni-channel. So that was a big change in the industry in consumer electronics, small domestic appliances, which is our space inside the consumer space. But it's been a big change, and I think a very positive change for the industry.
Yeah, I think the statistic that I always have in my head, and this is specific to FMCG and the grocery, which is that 85% of sales are still happening in a physical store. I'm assuming that number is different for consumer electronics, but like you said, it's still a significant portion of the business.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly right, and that's probably one of the spaces where consumer electronics or small or domestic appliances generally have accelerated beyond the FMCG space is in the e-commerce space, whereas FMCG, because of the nature of FMCG food products and the fact that consumers are used to going to the supermarkets a couple of times a week, they're much more, it's been a lot slower to develop, but of course it's catching up, right? Everybody's, e-commerce is probably growing very, very fast in the FMCG space.
So to that point, and again, I'm curious because like you said, you've kind of seen both sides of this, is like, how has, all the changes and the evolving dynamics that you just mentioned, with regards to COVID and now in essence moving into the new crises that we're dealing with now, how has that affected or impacted the organization, and how are you able to, in essence, keep your organization running during the lockdowns and then now actually post lockdown?
It's well, I think we all had to learn how to do things differently. I remember before COVID, probably we did a video conference once in a while. If we needed to have a meeting in a country, we jumped on a plane and away we went. I used to spend 85% of my time flying and traveling and outside of the office. Probably we used the phone a lot, but we didn't really think about Zoom. I didn't know what Zoom was and or Google Hangouts or anything like that. So the first thing was obviously, leveraging technology. to communicate with the teams, which we did regularly. And I remember during the early days of COVID, in the first couple of months when really the world was going into lockdown. And by the way, I was here in Italy at the time, which was probably the first country in Europe to really, or the world probably after China, to shut down.
Yeah.
It was kind of ground zero in Europe. And I remember everything was shutting down in Italy. You couldn't leave your house. I had to go back to Australia because my family was there. I managed to catch a last flight to Paris, I think. And I arrived in Paris and it was business as usual. Everybody was in bars, out at restaurants. Nobody knew even, I think, what COVID was. Then I went to London to catch my flight and it was pretty much the same. So Italy was really locking down and the rest of Europe was business as usual. But by the time I got to Australia, there was a quarantine. I had to go in a hotel quarantine. We were stopped at the airport. The army had put you on buses, stuff like that. And it was really interesting because then I remember in those first weeks when we were all thinking, God, this was the end of business. How would we survive? We had, as an executive team, twice a day, booked every day with the Longy family, Fabio De Longhi, who was a CEO at the time, and the senior executive team, twice daily meetings to discuss everything, action plans. We had plan A, B, C, and D organized. We were ready for the worst. We're putting financial measures in place. We had really a lot of discussion on how we'd manage staff, trying to make sure that we were able to continue to pay salaries to people. But at that moment, in that first month, we thought business in the world was over. Then we slowly started to realize in the following month that, hang on, consumers are now still able to buy. They're buying online. They're now stuck at home and they want to bake cakes and cook at home because they can't go out. They still want their morning coffee. And we saw the business start to uptick. So, of course, that management period was really important because we had to change our strategy daily. And we were going, and I remember in the space of about 3 weeks, we went from thinking the world was over and how would we survive to, wow, how do we supply products to consumers because the business is booming. And that happened in an incredibly short period of time. We're talking matters of a couple of weeks. And
Wow.
Of course, when you're adjusting strategy so fast, the only way to do that is to be in communication. Obviously, video, Zoom and whatnot really helped us a lot. And I was in Australia. The rest of the executive team were here in Europe. And we were able to do that. Unfortunately for me, it was often at 3, 4 in the morning. But certainly we're in constant communication. And the real strength of DeLonghi and the team and the people here is we're agile. There's no better company, I think, when we need to take fast decisions, we took them, we made a decision, and we just went. And if we had to change it a week later because the world changed, we changed it, and that was it. So then cascading that to the teams was important. So daily contact with the teams in the markets. We did a lot of HR, let me say, team building activities virtually and online. And that's what we did. Then post-COVID, we've kept obviously some of the tools and we try to do that. But I think it's also the face-to-face is very important. So the one thing we realized in the last year, probably a bit longer, is that putting people together around the table, in the room and able to discuss is also important. You can't just rely on the 1 or 2 hour video conferences. They tend to be more unidirectional. They tend to be, focused on the agenda you have in front of you. But when you put people around the table and you discuss, and you can be much, much more creative. So I think we need to balance the two. And we believe that putting people together and personal contact is a value. And it's something that, we're rebuilding as well as we start to travel again and things like that.
Yeah. And for you personally, like if you have to reflect on yourself, do you feel that you've changed as a leader if you think 4 years ago and now?
Yes, for good and bad. So probably the use of the heavy use of video conferencing and things like that means that, as I said, sometimes meetings are a little bit unidirectional, and I have to keep that in mind, and I'm constantly reminding the team that we need to still try to maintain that kind of open discussion aspect to the business. So that's something to be constantly reminded of, and I'm constantly reminding myself of that, because I've always had a very collaborative organizational business approach, very open listening, and it's harder when you use video conference. You have to work at it a lot harder. Then on the good side, it means I can be more accessible because we can have more meetings face to face using the technology, and maybe travel a little bit less. So that's also not necessarily a bad thing. But I do think travel, being in the markets, I've always been someone that likes to visit countries, likes to visit stores. I like to see people in the teams face to face. I like to meet customers face to face. I think there's always an extra something that's very hard to describe, but when you see what shoppers are buying, what they're touching and feeling in stores, what's physically sitting on the shelves, there's no substitute for that. So I think it's all about balance, right? Taking the best of the technology, but not losing what I would maybe call a little bit more the old school approach of being face to face with people as well.
Yeah. So earlier you referenced that one of the, let's say, the benefits to having gone through the COVID experience has been that it in essence, in a way, forced retailers to have to adapt to become more omni-channel. I'm curious to hear from your perspective, from a commercial strategy standpoint, what kind of impact has that had in terms of your channel split, in terms of how you think about it across retail, or let's say physical stores, but then e-com and then direct to consumer as well?
Sure. Had a big impact. So, in all honesty, I mean, it was not just retailers who weren't paying enough attention to e-commerce before COVID. It was also us. And, I opened the first e-commerce sites in the group in the US and China and Asia when I was responsible for that part of the business only before this current role, probably 10 years ago. And the group didn't have an e-commerce strategy, and we weren't really doing anything elsewhere in the world. So I've always had in my mind that e-commerce was an important part of our strategy, but COVID really highlighted it for the group. So everybody in the company, we were able to align all the ships to sail in the same direction, and really put a big emphasis on the e-commerce, the platforms, the expertise. So we built a huge competence during COVID. We now have a very, I would say, large but dynamic e-commerce direct-to-consumer team. We have now a setup in our logistics mindset and the way we've built our logistics networks to be able to service consumers directly. And we did a lot of work to upgrade our platforms, upgrade our websites. It's still an ongoing process because, in fact, it'll never finish. But in those first few months of COVID, we opened something like, by brand, we opened something like 120 websites, because we still manage locally, and we were able to do that. And that was something where we put a lot of focus. So, as a company, it changed us a lot. We opened our e-commerce channel, direct to consumer channel. That's the first thing. Secondly, now in the last 2 years and the last couple of years, we've also had to restructure, retrain, rebuild our teams to think about the omni-channel world with retailers that they're working in. So it's no longer just the key account manager who visits the retailer and sells as they did in the past. Now they have to be either trained themselves or accompanied by a digital online specialist who joins them for the meetings and is able to also work with the retailers, because buyers have to evolve as well. And we need to think, what are we doing online and offline? We've also invested in tools and systems, not just the platforms, but the tools. We've run a program here for many years, called Perfect Store, that we work with physical stores, very much just what most companies work with in the FMCG space, which is something we bought. But we've added to that perfect screen. So now we have tools that we have perfect store for the physical stores, perfect screen for the virtual stores, the virtual shelves, monitoring, measuring different metrics, but pretty much doing the same thing, all directed to be sure the brand experience is consistent, the execution is perfect on screen or on shelf in the physical stores, and that we're following the right KPIs to be sure that they're business drivers and we're able to sell more and support our retailers as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because one would think it's only a commercial thing, no, initially, like how you approach the different channel split, but it's obviously a organization-wide effort from commercial to marketing, supply chain, etc. And speaking about another department, which I'm sure has come also more to your attention after all these events. What about sustainability? I know that, Paul, you're passionate about the topic. How do you approach sustainability from DeLonghi?
Yeah, I mean, okay, sustainability is a hygiene factor these days for many companies, but it's also complex. So first is that it's just important because it's necessary for the world, right? And that's got to be the start point. It's not just a business metric. It's something that, I think we all have some kind of moral obligation to think in a more sustainable way and build businesses in a more sustainable way. And I see that trend also in retail. I mean, 3, 4, 5 years ago, sustainability was a topic because it was something that businesses, retailers, companies thought about because somebody said it's important and consumers believe it's important. And we kind of did it because we had to. Now, when I talk to retail partners at a senior level, people are talking about this in a very profound way in terms of moral obligation. So it's more than just something we need to do for business. It's something that really becomes part of the culture. And that's really where DeLonghi is as well. And probably what we did in the last few years is we started to measure and build metrics. We realized we were doing a lot of things that were in the space of being what many would consider to be sustainable, that we were just doing because they were good business practices as well. So, using less packaging, good business practice, you reduce your costs. Recycling, good business practice, and it has a positive impact. So, solar cells on the roof of the factory and using solar, reducing the carbon footprint because we have to ship less, run fewer trucks and things like that. They're all good business practices that we were doing that would fit under this space of this umbrella of sustainability. And frankly, we realized as a company, we're actually pretty sustainable. We just weren't talking about it or so much. So for the company, it's very important. Of course, these days, every company must, have it as part of their manifesto, as part of their responsibilities for their governance. We all now have dedicated people following sustainability in the company. So did it change a lot in terms of what we were doing? Some things, yes, but we're already doing a lot of things. Did it change a lot in the way we think and organize what we're doing? Yes, definitely, because now we do things with a sustainability point of view in mind from the start. So it's something I think every company needs to do. Every company is doing. All retailers are also forcing the issue, rightly so. And of course, this is all consumer driven at the end of the day.
Yeah. This reminds me of a discussion we had with another one of our guests a couple of episodes back where, he openly encouraged more collaboration within his own sector of the industry, right? Which is, like you said, this is something that we're all dealing with. So the more collaboration we can have, whether it be among what would seem to be competitors in some ways, but also with our customers, the better, right? So I imagine, for you also, this is playing a role in regards to the conversations that you're having with some of those retail partners.
Absolutely.
As well.
And our retail partners would make exactly the same comments. I mean, all of the different meetings and conferences I've been to this day, I mean, I'm hearing the same comments you just made, which is we need to do this together. We need to support each other and we need to understand it better together. What can we do better together? So, I think generally speaking, Europe tends to be in a pretty good space here because, through regulation, whether you like regulation or not, doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it forces better behaviors from everybody, and I think that's a positive thing. So it'll move us in the right direction. And doesn't need to cost necessarily. I mean, it can also have a positive benefit in terms of the bottom line. So either by selling sometimes products at a higher price because consumers are ready to pay more, but often because, hey, less packaging costs less. So, shipping in a smarter way and having not shipping, part truckfuls because you want to lower your footprint, your carbon footprint has a positive impact at the end of the day, right? Also on the bottom line.
Paul, thanks for this has been a great conversation, and it's been really interesting to hear your perspective with regards to what you're seeing, not just from a consumer electronics standpoint, but like you said, some of the lessons you've taken from your time at L'Oreal as well. Want to wrap up by asking you one last question, and this is a question that we ask all our guests, which is ask you to go back in time, and if you could go back and talk to Paul coming out of university before taking that first role, what would be the one piece of advice you would give yourself at the start of your career?
One piece. Probably there's a lot of things I tell myself, but if I had to focus on one is don't be afraid, generally. And in that I mean don't be afraid to, put yourself out there, to innovate, to take calculated risks, put your ideas forward. Don't be afraid to speak up, and be ambitious for your business. So don't be afraid would be the simple one, in a phrase. And the other one would be listen much more than you speak. Someone said to me once, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a good reason. You should always listen twice as much as you speak. And I think that's probably good advice to give myself.
This was Paul Accornero, Chief Commercial Officer at the DeLonghi Group. Hi, Efrain, again. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did, and probably will go and get another coffee soon.
I will. I think Paul has inspired me to maybe not just get a coffee, maybe buy one of those DeLonghi machines that you've got as well.
Yeah. So what are your key takeaways after this conversation?
There are several. I think, Paul shared a lot with us that I think our listeners hopefully are able to take from the conversation. First and foremost, I really liked how Paul expressed the need for consumer centricity, but also shopper understanding.
Yeah.
In terms of his role as a chief commercial officer, I think he said it really well when he said, we remind ourselves that we market to consumers and we sell to shoppers. So understanding that shopping mindset is really, really critical.
Yeah. I also found very interesting how the business of consumer electronics or appliances really reorganized through the pandemic, right? So if you look at the traditional players in the space, like Media Market, for example, has really worked on their online side, and that has kind of gone hand in hand with the manufacturers also improving their internal capabilities and effectively reorganizing the whole business for that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, if you had to kind of see the silver lining in the cloud that was COVID, that is COVID, it would be that, it did in essence ultimately become a catalyst for, and in some ways, forcing both retailers and brands to be more omni-channel in their approach.
Yeah, exactly. And then from a leadership perspective, I think it was interesting. And that's something that I think we've seen happen a lot post-pandemic, has been like how the importance of face-to-face connections is really like still pretty imperative in business, in the contrary of what many people thought when we went into lockdowns and working from home.
Yeah, again, I think Paul really, again, expressed it very nicely when he said that, things like Zoom and Teams, in terms of as a form of interaction, tends to be very agenda driven, but it's organic and in some ways less creative, right? So the need for that face-to-face interaction is still there. And I think, there's some of those habits that from the pandemic that we're taking with us in regards to using technology, kind of like what we're using now, you and I, but also kind of blending it with some of the things that we were doing from an interaction standpoint before the pandemic as well.
Yeah, that's why we enjoy doing face-to-face podcasts every now and then when we can.
Yeah.
And then I think another interesting one is the one of sustainability, which I think we can say is already on everybody's agenda, really.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think that, like he said, I think that the conversations around sustainability have become more elevated, not just in terms of from a organizational structure standpoint, but I think in terms of from a moral or almost even an ethical point of view in terms of, how we're talking about it as part of the core business. And, I also think that he touched on the fact that it's not just, good for the planet, but it's also in a lot of ways good for business as well, right? So if you can reduce packaging, you're taking cost out of your value chain as well. It just makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it also makes sense to say thanks to our listeners for downloading our episode again. Remember, you can follow us on LinkedIn, on our website. Also, the CPG guys over in the US creating great content, a lot about retail media and the online business, but also about regular CPG and the other side of the Atlantic. So again, thanks again for listening in, and we'll see you next week with another episode.